So welcome today to our second webinar in our webinar series, Adopting Materials Through an Equity-Focused Lens. Today's focus will be on designing an instructional vision that will lead and guide your materials selection and or your materials implementation. This webinar and the follow-up webinars are really kind of focused around making sure that you are thinking about things ahead of time and you've got some frameworks and structures in place so that the materials you do select will be targeted and focused to address any curriculum and instruction barriers or gaps that you're trying to address, and also address those students that you are serving in your communities. We have some wonderful guests with us today. I can't wait to introduce them. But before I do, if we can, there we go, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar, thank you for the question. This webinar will be recorded and made available to you in a follow-up email, along with any other resources or materials that we're sharing today, so you'll have those. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but please feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A box down at the bottom of your toolbar. Anything that we don't get to, we'll make sure we follow up. We'll try. So far, so good. We've had one webinar and we've been able to address and answer everyone's questions and have some really great dialogue. So hopefully that'll be taken care of during today's webinar. But if there's something that we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow that up. And please tag us in your socials. We are on both Twitter and Facebook. Use our @EdReports and the hashtag #MaterialsMatter on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll follow you. And hopefully, this conversation today will generate some interest in your followers. So, I am happy and pleased to introduce our guests for today. I'm the general host and will host all of our webinars, but we have a wonderful facilitator from our field services staff. Teresa Eliopoulos will be facilitating the discussion today with our two panelists, Dr. Todd Davis, who is the Chief Academic Officer from Aldine School District in Texas, and Jesse Melgares from the New Teacher Center, who will be talking about his experience also as a leader in a school district. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Teresa. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shanna, and welcome again, everyone, to the second webinar in our series, Adopting Materials Through an Equity-Focused Lens. As Shanna mentioned, this week we are focusing on designing an instructional vision, and I'm thrilled that we have Todd and Jesse here to speak with us about their experience. For the next hour, we will spend some time talking about instructional materials as a lever for equity. We'll talk about articulating an instructional vision, and then we will hear from our guests on how this actually works in practice. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. So as we are talking, make sure you're dropping your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. So here at EdReports, we believe that instructional materials are a lever for equity, and adoption and use of high-quality instructional materials can ensure that every student is learning grade-level, engaging, meaningful content. Research has shown that the use of high-quality instructional materials in classrooms can decrease inequities and instruction both between and within schools. We have built this webinar series to highlight 4 ways to include an equity lens in your adoption process. The first webinar focused on why materials matter, centering on the needs of students who have been the least well served in our systems. Today, we will focus on creating a strong vision of instruction for every student. In 2 weeks, we will look at local priorities and how those reflect the needs of your community and your students. And finally, we will discuss the importance of including voices and perspectives from a broad range of stakeholders. If you are unfamiliar with EdReports, we are a nonprofit organization that increases the capacity of teachers, administrators, and leaders to seek, identify, and demand the highest quality instructional materials. drawing upon expert educators, our reviews of instructional materials, and support of smart adoption processes equip teachers with excellent materials nationwide. Our theory of action is that by identifying excellence in instructional materials, we will increase the demand for excellence in the field. And that increased demand will then force an improvement in materials, which will result in better outcomes for students. Everports has developed a six-step process to assist states and districts in adopting instructional materials. And we have organized this process in a coherent way to focus on planning upfront before diving into materials to ensure that local wants, needs, and context are prioritized. As Shanna mentioned up front, we've seen too many times a situation where a district has selected 3 to 4 materials, but they have no idea how they got there or how they selected those materials to dig into. Our process helps to focus up front on how to choose that first selection of materials based on your local context. Our focus for today on articulating an instructional vision is a part of the initial planning and can be found in developing your local lens, which is step 2 in our process. If you're interested in learning more about these adoption steps, they can be found on the Everports website, along with many related resources to use in your adoption. Now let's get to the meat of today's presentation. Let's talk about an instructional vision. An instructional vision is the articulation of what teaching and learning should look like in a particular content area. Now, unpacking that a little, it is the district's articulation of what students should experience daily and the overall goals of a student's classroom experience. The instructional vision should guide all decisions that are made about a classroom experience to ensure that they can cohesively be put together. Now, why is this important? For a moment, imagine that you are handed a bag of puzzle pieces. You have no box, no picture, you have no idea what the puzzle looks like, you just have the pieces. How would you go about trying to fit them together? Would you kind of lay them all out and look for pieces that match? Would you start with the corners and the edges and try to build in? But wouldn't it be easier if you had a picture of what that's supposed to look like? I think so. And I believe our guests here today will agree with me that this is how we see an instructional vision, the overarching image that provides clarity to all of the individual pieces. In this instance, instructional materials, professional development, student experiences. So all of these pieces that impact a classroom. And without that overarching picture, those pieces are hard to fit together. You may slowly be able to identify 1 or 2 connections, but with the picture, you have something that guides you. And this is the importance of an instructional vision. So how do we do this? There are a variety of resources that should inform your vision, both large scale, national and international research, state level, so state standards and guiding documents. So for example, if you're looking at science standards, you should take into account your governor's STEM agenda, things like that. And then your local context. So a district and school mission and local context and priorities. We thought a lot about what creates characteristics of an effective vision statement. And the first is that it focuses on the student experience and details what students are learning. Student learning looks like in action. It should be embedded in a specific context of the content. So whether you are looking at ELA, math, or science standards, the content should be very specific to the discipline you're focusing on. It should align with state standards, but should not be limited to a review of those standards documents. It should be research-based and cited. It should prepare all students for college and career readiness. And it should include instructional implications which lead to critical thinking, problem solving, and transferable knowledge. We'll hear from our 2 guests on their best practices from their work, but the 2 overarching that we have identified that should occur are that this work should be created by a diverse committee, both of various roles and backgrounds, that is committed to investing time in what can be a lengthy process. And it should be communicated to all stakeholders, teachers, administrators, parents, students, and community members. The more your vision is communicated, the more people can be brought on board. and the more then that buy-in can lead to effective change. Now, I am thrilled to turn to our guests and have a conversation with them about their work in creating an instructional vision. So first, I'm going to turn to Todd. And Todd, I'd love it if you can talk to me about the goals of your curriculum and adoption process and the implementation and those students that you're serving in Aldine.
Sure. Thank you, Teresa. And first, thanks to Ed Reports for this opportunity. Always happy to share our story. A little context about who we are and where I'm coming from. I'm from Aldine ISD. We are located in Houston, Texas. And as everyone knows, Houston is a large metropolitan area, one of the most diverse cities in the nation. We're located in the northern part of Houston, and we're blessed to serve 67,000 students. We're considered a large urban school district, 67,000 students in 82 campuses. Our students, 9 out of 10 of our students are economically disadvantaged, and we serve a population of about 73% Hispanic, 23% Black, and of our students, 38% of them are English learners. And the reason I start with that, because I think it is very important context to provide some insight in our journey moving into the right process for literacy instruction. Our goals for our curriculum adoption were very much what you just shared, Teresa. It is about ensuring that every single student in Aldine ISD has equal access to high quality instructional materials and a skillful, well-prepared, highly effective teacher every single day. And that's without any exception, every student, every classroom, every school, every day in Aldine ISD. And that we know that if we can provide that high quality instructional materials and instruction for our students, that literacy is the gateway for their opportunities in the future. And that is part of our vision and belief statements in Aldine ISD is goals and opportunities, choices and opportunities for our students. And literacy is the key to making that happen.
So in thinking about your process, Todd, how did you arrive at the need for new materials? And talk to me a little bit about how you came up with the establishment of your ELA instructional vision.
Okay, well, that is it's a bit of a long story. I'm going to try to get through this coherently, but it all started back with a series of events that started back in 2018. So first of all, it was the time in Texas where literacy textbook adoption, I think that's a very important thing to say. It was the cycle for textbook adoption in the state of Texas. At that same time, in Aldine ISD, we had just completed a comprehensive audit of our curriculum here in Aldine. And that curriculum audit, it provided us a series of findings and a series of recommendations. One of the most alarming, one of the most glaring series of findings and recommendations were all centered around our current literacy practices. We were a balanced literacy district using a very well-known balanced literacy curriculum. But the findings of the curriculum audit, it told us, number one, that the resources we were using, the practices we were using were not aligned to our state standards. And through many interviews with teachers and classroom observations, the audit also showed us that we had very minimal teacher investment in the curriculum, and we had very poor implementation. That only 20% of the classrooms that they had observed, the curriculum was actually being implemented with some semblance of effectiveness. So you tie all those recommendations together with the fact that at the same time, our student performance data from our state showed that our third graders were only performing at a 30% proficiency level. Now, put all that together and the fact that we were in the process of adopting a new textbook for literacy, the challenge is that the individuals who were charged with making a recommendation, fortunately, the only way forward that they could see for us in Aldine was a continuation of balanced literacy. The balanced literacy mindset had such a stronghold on their belief set that they had a hard time accepting the recommendations and the findings of the audit, and they were having a hard time seeing that the student performance results were actually directly correlated to the practices that we were putting in place across the district in terms of literacy. So thankfully now, going into 2019, we have a new superintendent that comes to town. And Dr. LaTanya Goffney certainly did not have that same stronghold or that same belief set when it came to literacy instruction, balanced literacy. And through her listening, looking, and learning tour her first year, she quickly identified, look, we've got an issue here in Aldine. And anything that was in regard to curriculum adoption, her directive was it all needed to stop, because we needed to get our instructional practices right. We need to get literacy right in Aldine before we could even move forward with anything in terms of a curriculum or textbook or anything along those lines. So she very wisely requested a second opinion audit. That was brilliant. And so we brought in another external partner, did another audit specific to our literacy curriculum. That audit found the same findings and had the same recommendation. And both recommendations of both audits were, stop your practices now. You need to do something different when it comes to literacy instruction. And that right about that time, I was very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to become the chief academic officer. And so my first directive, my first charge from our superintendent was, figure this out. Let's get this right when it comes to literacy instruction in Aldine. And my challenge was at the time that I'd been in the district for 30 years. I'd been supervising principals at the high school level, and really I didn't have the same strong beliefs when it came to balanced literacy, but because I was in the district, that was still the only really literacy pathway that I could see at the time. But I knew we needed something different. I knew there had to be something different out there. And I knew that if we were going to adopt a new curriculum, that it could not be a top-down technical change, that we had to really work on the belief set, that there was still, even though we had minimal investment from our teachers, but we had leaders that had, again, such a deep commitment, and the curriculum had such a stronghold on them, that I knew that we needed to go a path forward, and that we needed to make sure that whatever decision we made was a decision that was made for Aldine by Aldine, but it was a decision made from the middle out, not from the top down. And now, as I said before, we didn't quite know what we didn't know. We didn't know what that path forward would really be. And so thankfully, we were introduced to an external partner, TNTP. And Kristen McQuillan and her team from TNTP were just a godsend, to tell you that. So as I was presenting to them we need to build through a collective learning group, that we build a task force. And as a result of this task force, we need to build a vision and framework for our literacy instruction in Aldine. Again, I didn't necessarily know what that vision and framework was going to land on, but I knew that we needed to do that, and it needed to be something that came from a collective group of people throughout our district. And so what TNTP was able to do, we formed our task force, and we knew that we had to give the task force the challenge of, you will create a vision and framework for our district. Our superintendent gave us an entire year to go through a process to get it right when it came to literacy. And thankfully, through the assistance of TNTP, they were able to help us pull us from a balanced literacy lens to a science of teaching reading lens. And we were able to, through the support of TNTP, we were able to take the task force through a series of 5 months of learning. Each month, we were able to do a series of learning, progression of learning all around the science of teaching reading. And it was amazing that as we got into that process, that the group of individuals within this task force, 50 people from different settings in the district, different levels of responsibility in the district, that they were just hungry for this kind of information, this kind of learning, and they quickly embraced the science of teaching reading. And thankfully, through this process, then we were able to craft a vision, a framework that is rooted in the science of teaching reading, and that has been our anchor for literacy instruction in Aldine. It was the catalyst for us selecting the right curriculum as we move forward. But thankfully, it took a year, and it took the fact that we were able to pause, come together as a group, study as a group, really understand and be vulnerable that it is okay to relearn. It's okay to accept that we we needed new learning, but ultimately that we needed to do something different for our students. And we're very pleased at where we landed with that.
It's an incredible story, Todd, and even more so that you had the time, right, to really dig into this work and spend months and months with your task force, really driving home these really important aspects. So really exciting to hear. Can you tell me a little bit now about how your vision and belief statements have guided the adoption and implementation of your new materials?
Yeah, and that was really an important piece of this, because as I feel like I may have said earlier, but it was really important to us that the vision and framework that was articulated, it was very clear that it was built by Aldine for Aldine, that it wasn't driven by an external partner, that it wasn't driven by a publisher, that we weren't trying to manipulate anyone toward any type of curriculum, but that it was going to be, of course, the defining factor for what we believed was right for literacy instruction. And so that was that framework then that we utilized as we went and selected the curriculum. And we wanted to make sure that we found the match of curriculum to our framework, not matching our framework to any particular curriculum. And as we move forward into the implementation of the curriculum, the framework has that one constant anchor, that common language that is really how can I say, the connective tissue that helps us continually build the why. As when we have some struggles with implementation, we can always come back to the framework, and we always are anchored in, but this is what we believe. We believe in foundational skills. We believe in complex text on a daily basis. We believe in building knowledge. And as we continue to build that why, that awareness through the framework, then that builds our teachers and our leaders' confidence that they're doing the right thing. That leads to higher levels of fidelity of the implementation of our curriculum.
Thank you. And I'm sure there are many folks that are watching this webinar that are curious about how this could work for them, and as they think about their potential upcoming adoptions, are curious about any lessons learned that you would like to share from any part of this process to kind of help others as they are embarking upon this.
Well, I think you mentioned it, having time. The gift of time was what we really needed to make this happen. And then the opportunity to collectively learn. I think we can't discount that. Like I said, we didn't know what we didn't know, but the fact that we were able to study together and learn together and grow together, be vulnerable together, that was extremely important. But I think the key thing that we learned in all of this is that never underestimate the reoccurring need to be rooted in your why. Why are we moving forward in this direction? And again, don't let it sit. Once you finish the work and once you've adopted curriculum, that there has to be a common thread of that communication that moves forward in all aspects. And then ultimately, you have to have a superintendent that is a champion of the work. If the superintendent is not the lead literacy learner in your district, then that level of support, it's going to be hard to get that level of commitment if you don't have that level of support. And we've been fortunate that our superintendent has been 100% behind us. Common message that she shares is trust the process. And when teachers and leaders hear that, then they know that, okay, it is okay to implement this curriculum with fidelity, stay consistent with our vision and framework moving forward.
That's fantastic. A question from our audience is, how often did your task force meet? And while answering that, can you also expand a little bit upon the literacy professional development that as a task force you engaged in?
Yes, so we met monthly. We met I think we had 5 or 6 sessions of learning before we then branched off into a core group that developed the vision and framework, then circled back to the task force to make sure that it was vetted through the task force for final approval moving forward to the entire district and our school board and so on. The series of learning that we did, we took basically some piece of what is considered the science of teaching and reading, or Scarborough's rope, and studied pieces of that. But it was a very well crafted progression of learning that started with with foundational reading practices. We went into complex text. We went in and we studied really deeply building knowledge and the importance of tier 2 vocabulary that is developed through a series of deep engagement in building of knowledge in the curriculum. And so it was having a deep understanding of each of these components that could be all captured within the science of teaching reading that ultimately became our framework.
Thank you. And I want to make sure we're going to bring Jesse into this conversation because he has so much to share. And so I'm going to turn Jesse first for you to answer just a few questions. And I want to make sure we all have a chance to come back together and hear from everybody. And so Jesse, I know you've had the chance to do this work from a number of different seats in school systems. And from your experience, can you tell me just what role does a clear vision of instruction play in the work of a system leader, a school leader, or a teacher?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me give you a little bit of context of where I've had the privilege to work. So to give you that background a little bit, I'm from LA. I live in LA, work in LA, and I've had the opportunity to be able to do this now a couple different times from different roles. So the first time I really got a chance to do it was when I was a school administrator at KIPP Seoul Academy in East LA. Shout out to East LA. And then as a director of math for Alliance College Ready Public Schools, which is a network of 28 schools here in Los Angeles. I think to your question about what role does an instructional vision play throughout this entire process, it's really critical. And I think the reason it's critical is because I think we need to take a step back and really experience this through the folks that it impacts the most. So teachers and students. So oftentimes I hear from folks frustration in curriculum changes because it's something that's being done to them instead of they were part of that process. And so, thinking about it from a teacher's perspective, for example, if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching math and I've been teaching math from a curriculum that I know very well for the past 10 years, or I've created my own materials, that doesn't require as much prep as it did on day one because I know that material so well. And now someone's coming in and telling me, you're going to do this curriculum change. That potentially is a lot of hours of additional prep time, at least in that beginning stage, while I try to adopt this new material to internalize it. That's a pretty big ask. And then from a student perspective, if I've been doing math in a very direct instructional way where there's direct models presented to me that I could follow all the time, it's not as rigorous. There's not as much thought process as that might be required. And now you're saying, students, you're now going to explore, you're going to make mistakes. By the way, this math is a lot harder. That's also a pretty big ask, even though in theory and down the road, it is a much more engaging and much better way to learn math. And so, given all those things of the frustrations that might come up for your different stakeholders, it is really critical to get really clear, as Todd mentioned, what are the things that we care about? Like, what is our instructional vision? What do we value? And ultimately, what is the change that we wish to be true in the classroom? So I'll share a little bit about how I've approached this from different roles and some of the learnings I've had along the way. But in the first time I really did this was when I was a school administrator. We had just transitioned to the Common Core. Our teachers were creating their own material. And through these discussions, something was not working. We knew something wasn't working. And so I engaged the teachers in trying to figure that out. And it was really important to develop an instructional vision to stamp who we are and who we're trying to be in our math department. But it was really important to do two things. One, to make sure that this was all grounded in the science of learning. And so the readings that we chose, the things that we were trying to, what informed the vision, those readings are really critical. And at the time I was reading a lot from Joe Bowler and the 5 Practices of Orchestrating Mathematics Discussion, a number of other books. And the second thing is to engage folks within that process. And so what ended up happening was we started to see through these readings, and I would take stuff back to the teachers and say, like, here's what I'm seeing. We started to see these patterns of things that are really important in math. And then we kind of audited ourselves and said, how much of this is actually happening in our classrooms? And what we realized is that a lot of that stuff wasn't, right? And like ultimately, like the patterns of things that we were seeing, like kids should be discussing open-ended task, low floor, high ceiling, they should be making mistakes, like all those things, they weren't happening because our materials that we were creating weren't conducive for that kind of work. And so I remember the first thing we tried was like, well, why don't we try looking at the materials that we've created and making them more open-ended? And I remember this chart from 5 practices, and it said like, here are the components as like a rubric to make things more open-ended. And we tried to make it more open-ended. And what we quickly realized is that takes a lot of time to do it. And it still wouldn't be rigorous enough. So that really led to the conversation of, here's the vision of the components of what we want to see in the classroom. Here's the current materials that we're using. We need to go in another direction and find curriculum. And at that time, there weren't a lot of curricular options available. And so I tried to find whatever we could, but at least we were then able to look at curriculum through the lens of that vision. I think that was, that ended up working really well for our school. And one of my learnings is when I transitioned to systems leadership, and I was a director of math. I came in with the vision because it's something that I had developed, we had iterated over time. We tried it, like, this doesn't work, we can make it look like this. And so coming in as a director of math, I think my misstep was that I didn't engage a representative amount of folks in that process to implement this vision. I did do it with a limited set of folks, like we went deeper into it, and it worked. I think what we realized is like once it came to implementation, that group of folks that was engaged implemented it at a higher level because they were part of that process at the beginning. Whereas everyone else, it felt a little more like, I'm doing this because you're telling me to. I'm doing this for compliance reasons. And that level of engagement wasn't as high. And so a couple of years later, when we were trying to figure out, I wanted to tackle intervention for math. We went through a process to adopt materials for intervention. And I remembered that misstep from my first curriculum change as a director of math. And we took a year. Todd, you said a year, and similar thing. Like we took a year to really study this. And there was a person on my math team, Lindsay Uribe, who's just fantastic, managed this process. We put together a committee, and I wanted that committee to be diverse. I wanted that committee to be representative of the different sort of pockets of alliance, right? So we wanted people that were teachers, that were coaches, that were administrators. We wanted folks that were diverse in ethnicity. We wanted folks that were diverse in the amount of years that they had been working. And we started with a reading. And through that reading, we started to pull out what are the things that are important to us in an intervention class. And we developed a vision, and then we started to look at materials and looking at curriculum and looking at like different platforms. It was actually more what we were looking at, but we were looking at different platforms to see what best fits that vision. And another thing that I think is really important that in going through that is to have folks actually go in and try to teach a lesson of the different curricula that you're considering, because there is a lot of stuff that I think people can take away from the user experience of what is the ask of teachers, how long is this going to take? So I'll pause there, but those are sort of like the 3 different ways of that I've encountered it.
No, that's really helpful, Jesse. And thank you for sharing all of your experiences from all your different vantage points over the years. We have a follow-up question. You mentioned Bowler's math mindset. How did you incorporate that into the initial desire to build a common framework of understanding around exemplary math instructional practices?
Did Joe Bowler, like how did I incorporate Joe Bowler into?
Yes. Yep. How did you incorporate that into your kind of initial You talked a little bit about building a common framework of understanding. You talked about using that resource. How did you bring all of those things together in a cohesive way?
I think a lot of it is grounded in being inclusive of getting people together and then reading stuff together and discussing. And then like, also, I'm also okay with being imperfect. And I think this is important because so many times in our profession, there's like this imposter syndrome of like, we got to get it right. We got to get it right. We got to get it right from the get-go. I try to approach things from more of a design thinking, kind of like, let's iterate together. And so I think that's a part of it, is because you're reading all this stuff and you're reading it together and you're quickly realizing, I don't know most of these things. This is not how I learned math. This is not how I taught math. This is very different, and it's quickly lifting everything I don't know. And so I think, what I like to say to folks is, hey, we don't know all these things. This is a new way to do math. Let's just try it. Let's get our best thinking in the moment onto a piece of paper. I don't care if it's not perfect. Let's go and try it, and then come back together and then take our learnings and refine the vision. So I think that's a big part of it. So many times there's this like perfectionism of, we got to get it right from the get-go. And I'll tell you right now, that's never gonna end well for anybody involved.
I want to bring Todd back out here and make sure that we have a chance to, hear from both of you. You both have been in this work, in the deep. Jesse, you focused a lot on math, but I know you have a lot of experiences. Todd, you focused a lot on the ELA framework, but you also, as the Chief Academic Officer, kind of sit across all disciplines. I want to make sure you two have a chance to follow up with one another on hearing one another talk about your different experiences. What questions do you have for each other? What do you want to really dig in on and kind of push one another's thinking on here?
Get in here, Todd.
Well, I want to say it's exciting to hear that you were working on the math vision and framework, because we are embarking on that this year as well. So we replicated our practices around literacy, and now we're doing it. We did it this year for math. We did it for our multilingual practices. We're going to do it for science. We're going to do it for social studies. But Jesse, it was exciting because so much of what you shared is what we're experiencing in the whole math, the world of math, and the creating a vision and framework around math. And for me, it is an area where I am uncomfortable, to be quite honest with you. So you're right, that vulnerability, that design thinking, but no matter what the subject area is, I think I just want to amplify the fact that you have to go into it, number one, with the mindset that we are going to relearn, that this is about coming to new conclusions, and that it is okay to accept the fact that you don't have all the answers, that you don't see necessarily the answers now, because if you do, then it becomes a fabricated experience. If you go into this with already the end in mind, already the end determined, then don't do it, because it's just a manipulating of your people's time, their efforts, and their energy, their commitment to you. So yeah, so much of what you're saying, Jesse, it's just refreshing to see that, yes, there's others out there doing this and the same challenges we're facing.
Todd, I think you mentioned something that's important too, is to go in it with a learner mindset, not go in with it as, I've already made a decision, right? And I'm going to go through the motions and guide everyone towards this decision, because that really upsets people. And I think there's something I've also learned along that process around clarity on who is the final decision maker and who has input, because it infuriates people to do like a dog and pony show. And where if at the very beginning, they knew, I am making this decision, someone in the central office is making this decision, but I want your input. That's a lot clearer than like, hey, we're going to go through this process. The committee recommends something, and then I decide something else because I already made a decision anyway. They're like, why did you waste my time for the past year? And I think that's another part that's really critical. I wanted to ask you, Todd, there's something that resonated with me. You said your systems leader, your superintendent, has to be the lead learner in that. And I 100% just cannot emphasize how important that is on what kind of example that sets for everyone in the system and how it lifts morale to see like, okay, I see someone at the top who has admitted, I don't know this yet, but I'm going to do the work to learn and I'm going to ask questions. I've seen that approach is just much more conducive to bringing people along to a change this big.
It really is. And so I think it's so important that, number one, the superintendent comes out and says, okay, we've got to do something different. But I'm putting trust in our people. I'm putting trust in all of you that you will collectively come to a conclusion that is right for Aldine, right for our students. And but then that communication, though, it's not just a launch, that it's a common thread that happens. It's consistent throughout the entire process. And what we have seen with our principals is that it gives them, where they have that tug of the teachers are, that can't necessarily release old practice. And the principal has to stand strong, but the principal might not necessarily have that confidence yet to do that. The ability to lean a little bit on, well, look, our superintendent, this is the message that we're charged with. Trust the process. Now move forward and implement with fidelity. That's that level of confidence then that can put the principal in a position to stand strong, and then raises their capacity to do that on their own in the future. So yeah, I can't emphasize enough how critical that is.
Yeah, and I think that also gives people permission, if they're hearing it from the top, that I think a message that needs to be communicated from leadership during these processes is also like, we might take a short-term hit on scores. Right. Because adopting curriculum, if I'm a teacher and I'm now having to read the lessons and internalize them, I've never taught them before, it's going to take me a while to get to the level where I know the material well enough where I'm teaching it at a higher level. So as a result, we're going to take a short hit on exit tickets. We're going to take a short hit on interims, on the state tests. And if the message hasn't been made clear, like it's okay if we take a short-term hit, and we haven't aligned, if there are incentives to those test scores, we have not aligned that to the new reality of the next 2 to 3 years, people are understandably going to be skeptical during this time.
Yeah, so true. And so, it's really about what are the during the immediate implementation, the first phase of implementation, what are the metrics you're looking at, and that you're going to hold people accountable for? And for us, it was around investment and implementation. We're surveying our people, we're doing classroom observations, but really how we're identifying whether or not we're having success in this first year is around those two key metrics: investment and implementation. And so that also, the fact that we're in a pandemic was, a challenge, but we said we weren't going to let that be an excuse at all for us, and we're going to move forward. So we went ahead, we adopted full scale, and then kind of a side benefit from all this is that state testing it's still happening, unfortunately, but it is the importance of the focus of accountability has lessened a little bit. So that has given some people a little bit more confidence moving forward and doing the right thing. But the message that I say, that we all say frequently, is that we're not playing a short game. We're no longer going to put Band-Aids on learning so that we can think that we can get a boost in test scores. We're playing the long game. There is an end game of graduation with choices and opportunities. It's students with the opportunity to enter an advanced coursework at the high school level and being successful in those, thriving in those courses. That's the long game that we're trying to play right now. And so with that, again, it's about building people's confidence to just stick with the plan, stick with the process.
And so
Philadelphia 76ers.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about that process that you mentioned there, Todd, so you are all talking about really important facets of our system and how they all interplay. And reflecting back on those visions that you created, how do you see them touching those different aspects of the system and helping to inform those decisions. So when you're looking at, say, assessment or professional development or other things, how have you seen the visions that you've created come into play in those aspects?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different layers to that. So first of all, let's talk about assessments first, and how we analyze the results of our assessments now. Because as you move into a knowledge building structure with your literacy curriculum, your focus is away from building skills to building knowledge. And when we're dealing with a practice that's so ingrained in people that we analyze our performance data through skills, that's a very hard transition. And that was one of the really the tough shifts that we had to make throughout this year. But we were able to kind of work through that process. We were able to build some protocols. And again, it was all based on our belief set is around building knowledge. And so we're going to analyze, we're going to still have interim assessments. There's still a necessity around that. However, we're going to analyze them in accordance to the framework, not in accordance necessarily to what the state is expecting us to do, because the state results, it's going to play out. Ultimately, we want to send the message to our people that the state test is the floor. That's not the ceiling. We're working for something much higher than just proficiency as demonstrated through that. Our students are capable of so much more than that. And so, that's one really key factor where our framework has driven. And then, like you said, in terms of professional development, it is all anchored in our framework. Now, the whole notion of high quality instructional materials, high quality curriculum, that was not in our purview years ago. And now that is present in Aldine, and that is what we're anchoring our resources around. Our mindset around professional learning needs to be rooted in the curriculum now.
Yeah.
Or we used to call it content. Now, it is curriculum-based professional learning, and it is all about building that confidence for our teachers moving forward and being able to implement effectively. So, Jesse, what about you? I want to pass this to you because I could go on and on.
No, man, you bring up some really good points, Todd. Just bringing the hot fire as always. I think I agree with you. I think so I'm thinking of the vision, right? Ultimately, it's grounded in what is the change, or what are the changes that we wish to be true in the classroom? Here are the actions that are grounded in these sort of tenets of this vision that we believe to be true. In math, it happens to be the mathematical practices. And I think, assessments, well, let me take a step back. If that's what you're trying to do if you're trying to bring this instructional vision to life in every classroom across your system, then every system that impacts that needs to be aligned towards that action. Because what you quickly find, and what I have found, is that you have this vision, you start to do these trainings, and you're trying to change actions in the classroom, but maybe the principal walkthrough form is different than what the vision says. Maybe the teacher evaluation is different than what the vision actions are saying. And it actually is discouraging them from doing that. Maybe your interim assessments are actually disincentivizing teachers to have those actions, to your point. And so I think it's really important, grounded in the vision, that you're also taking stock of everything that influences those actions in the classroom. Because what I've learned is anything that is off by a centimeter, everything needs to be lockstep, because if it's off by a centimeter at the central office, it's going to be a mile by the time it gets down to the classroom, and that upsets everyone involved. And so, it's important to have that vision and then to align everything to that, because ultimately you're going to start running into some issues when the going gets tough, right? You're implementing, you're getting kids to read complex texts, and you're seeing oh, wow, the vocab and the background knowledge on this is really intense, and my kids don't get it. The urge is going to be I'll say I'm implementing it, but I'm not really implementing with fidelity. I'm taking things away. But if you have the vision and everyone is on board with that vision, it'll remind everyone of, well, actually, if you water down the text, that actually goes against one of our central tenets in this vision. Or if you're just, I'm just going to do direct instruction math all the time, that actually takes away one of the central tenets in our vision. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind and to have the vision guide, not just the classroom actions, but everything that influences that, which is really hard.
So I wanted to say, so true what you're saying, Jesse, and what I can't get through this without saying one word. You know, the framework is your tool for coherence throughout your system. And if you're so right, because you will have people that are not completely bought in that will be looking for that crack in coherence throughout the district. And they will jump in and they will amplify that as much as they can. So it's inevitable that we're going to have blind spots. But we need to have a strong coalition of people that are going to think towards the blind spots, look around the corner, trying to identify them and get ahead of them. But then when it does happen, that we fix that. We don't continue to self-induce the problem, and that we are very vulnerable. And we say, yeah, you're right, we missed that. That was a blind spot, but we're going to pull it back in because we have our anchor. We have our vision and framework that's going to pull that back in. And now we're going to move forward. And that particular piece or that particular crack is now fixed and we're good. But it's just that level of coherence that a vision and framework can do for a system is so powerful. And now what we're seeing, for instance, today we did a multi-learning collective learning. We're doing we're replicating our practice that we did with literacy this year in math, and then we're looking at our bilingual practices. And so what we found today is that individuals on our multilingual collective learning are looking at their vision and framework, and they're seeing there's a need for all frameworks in our district to be connected, that they see an alignment between literacy, math, and collective learning. And I think that was so powerful today that they noticed that, because that is that level of coherence, that it's not just one standing alone, but as you build out instructional expectations in all content areas, or even as a district as a whole, that you need to have that understanding that it is all within one unit of interconnected pieces of serving the child as a whole. But they need to see that connectivity, and it's about raising confidence and capacity in your people.
Yeah, I know we are running kind of short on time here at the end, but I do have one final question for you. And as both of you talked about, this vision impacts almost every aspect of the system and really drives change. So can you talk to me about, I know you both mentioned you went through lengthy processes to develop your visions. Can you talk to me a little bit about how families and or students were involved in the creation of your instructional visions?
Yeah, that's admittedly, this is not something I think I've managed well. I think where I did do it, probably there was more involvement, was the first time I did it, because I just had access to students every day. And so I would routinely pull in kids and say like, hey, here's a task. It's a little hard. Can you all figure it out? And I'd watch them work together. I'd watch the way they made mistakes. I'd watch the way they asked each other's questions. And I would then collect their feedback of like, all right, tell me what you think. What is this? Like, oh, mister, that was hard. Or, oh, I like that we got to talk. Or I like that it was hard. We never get a chance to do this. So I think that input, it was very helpful. And it's something that I think becomes really hard to do in a system. But if I'm doing it again, I would probably lean into the committee and say like, you are in front of kids right now. Do me a favor. By the time we meet next time, like go and try some of this stuff out, which goes to one of the earlier points about really ensuring, if you're considering 3 different curricula, to go and actually, everyone should go and try the lesson, including the people in the central office. There's so much that you will learn about how difficult this is and how your other systems do not incentivize that action from the curriculum by trying it yourself. And you could do that with kids and get their input as well. Todd, shooting it to you.
All right, well, I have to say that's a really good question, Teresa, and that's an area where we need to grow. And in our literacy work, that was a missed opportunity in involving our community, our parents, and definitely our students. So as we, like I said, we are replicating that process, and that's absolutely where we need to grow in Aldine, is making sure that, when we say we involve stakeholders, we've got to make sure we involve all stakeholders. Yeah, so that's a great question.
Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I hope our audience did as well. And we saw there were some great questions coming through the chat, so we appreciate your involvement. And we'll make sure that if we didn't get to answer your questions, we will think about how we can address those in the future. Bear with me. Pull back up our presentation here. If you found this interesting and helpful and you want to learn more, EdReports has created a resource on how to articulate an instructional vision. You can find it on our webpage, edreports.org, and you'll see if you click on the resources tab and scroll down, you will find it there. For all of you thinking about adopting instructional materials, there are many ways that we at EdReports can help you think about that. We support states and districts in building awareness, signaling quality, conducting high quality local reviews, and supporting smart adoption processes. And if any of these things are things you are interested in, feel free to email me or anyone on the EdReports team to learn more. We look forward to concluding this webinar series with 2 more webinars, one on May 6th around establishing adoption priorities, and the next on May 20th around stakeholder engagement. And we really hope that you are able to join us then. So thank you very much for all of your time today. And thank you again to Todd and Jesse for joining us and sharing with us their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you in the follow-up webinars. Take care. Have a great day.